Thank you very much for being with us this evening, or this afternoon as it may be. We are, speaking on MCAT, we are the Xavier Foundation. We are Save St. Francis Xavier School. And we are very interested in a topic this evening or today that is of great interest, and it's the evolution of the early missionaries in our state and what part did they play in developing our state, the state of Montana. With us we have Philip and Mrs. Persig, who, and then we have Gloria Rourke, myself, Tom Moylan. We have James Weir. We have Teresa Albee. We're all people that are interested in this story, and we do to this day participate in one way or another. I'd like to start off with Mr. Persig, who is working in this area. And Phil, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please, just for the audience? And
I was invited to talk, I guess, to speak a little bit about the research that my wife and I have been doing on the Blackfeet, and some of it does pertain to the missionary work that the Jesuits did with the Blackfeet. I'm not considered a scholar. I don't consider myself a scholar in that area, but certainly have some background in it.
Well, thank you. Mrs. Persig, you are then working directly on the project too.
Right, yes. Mm-hmm.
It's an intensive project that takes you back up to that country, to the Blackfoot country,
right,
not infrequently.
We're up there almost weekly.
Gloria, you're a member of
the Xavier Foundation and St. Francis Church, and homemaker, and just interested in the preservation of our history.
Yes, and I'm a retired physician, and we're very interested in that the St. Francis Xavier campus stay with us in its and that the buildings be used. James Weir is with the AFL-CIO in the job retraining, especially. James?
Yeah, mainly, well, it's exclusively for people who've been laid off from their jobs. We help them retrain, relocate, or get back into the workplace as soon as possible. So there is help out there. Anybody is laid off.
Thank you.
There is help out there.
Yes, yes, yeah. There is help. There is help. And yeah. James, just go down and see James at the Union Hall. Yeah. And Teresa, I might be coming down myself, James. I'm basically being retired. I think I'm going to have to, get back in and doing something here. Teresa is a nurse and a person that's deeply interested in this. Teresa?
I'm going to correct you on my name. My name is Therese. It's T-H-E-R-E-S-E. It's the little flower, Saint Therese. Anyway, my goal is for St. Francis Xavier School to be saved. I have a deep, deep, deep feeling for this because I am from Anaconda. I have lost my St. Paul's School, which the Ursuline nuns had taught. I went through, I'll say, 9 years because I started in kindergarten, and they taught every single year up through the 8th grade. We also lost my St. Paul's Church. It was a nice church. It was not a beautiful, exorbitant building, but it was nice. It was convenient. It was in the center of town. And for that reason, because of the losses that I have received in my lifetime, my education, my baptismal, my confirmation, and my marriage in St. Paul's Church is gone. I am very strong about saving the school of St. Francis Xavier.
Well, thank you very much, Teresa. And I think we'll keep exploring those issues because they mean a lot to all of us. And there's a very interesting thing has just come out in our thinking about this, and that is that the Ursuline Sisters Convent, which was going to be lost in Great Falls, was actually the Ursuline Sisters Convent was actually has been the subject of a foundation. And so I'm going to pass this on over to Phil Persig, who is researching in this area. The Ursulines are there because of as I understand it, Phil, a mission out at St. Peter's. Can you tell us something about that or how that evolved?
Well, there were 4 missions, as I understand, 4 St. Peter's missions. The first one, I think, was established close to the Four Persons Agency on the Teton by Shoto. It eventually ended up over at Cascade or in the neighborhood of Cascade for various reasons, the moving of the reservation line and a number of other reasons.
And then there were other locations.
Right, there were 4 locations, as I understand it.
And at one point, the Ursuline sisters came to help in the, operating a mission school.
Yes.
And then they were plagued by fires, I guess.
Yeah, there were several fires.
That resulted in loss of buildings.
Right. At various times.
From the video, we have some video footage which you, the viewing audience, will be seeing, and in that early part of the footage, it ends up with what look like Roman ruins, really, just masonry is all that's left, and they're overgrown. It's barely recognizable that at one time. Yeah. And of course, then they did move into town. How was the acceptance of the missionaries at store acceptance among the Blackfeet?
I think you're right. I think there was mixed feelings, but they were persistent, and the Jesuits were persistent. And over time, I think they were able to persuade their way back onto the reservation and work with particularly the younger people.
Yeah, and that's right. These stories are not, it's not just a slam dunk by any means. The native people here in this valley, the Salish, Kootenai, and the Flatheads, they were referred to by different names, but they first embraced the new, I guess they called it good medicine, of baptism and the Eucharist, the sacrifice of the Mass, but then I believe there was a negative reaction that resulted in St. Mary actually being abandoned around 1850. I'm not a historian, so please don't anybody hold us strictly to the dates. And I think another thing, Phil, in your research, you're discovering some features. I mean, in other words, some of this is very difficult to pin down exactly what did happen. Huh?
Yeah, the documentation isn't always that solid when you're researching.
In other words, there are assumptions, say, in the history books, you might say,
Frequently.
that don't necessarily, on deeper inquiry.
I think that may be true. Yeah, it's difficult to document certain periods of time.
Well, wasn't it the Flathead Indians who sent out like 4 groups to meet the Jesuits and bring them back? And then that was where they settled at St. Mary's. And there was the rivalry between the Blackfeet and the Flathead. And I think those include the other tribes that were there. And they got angry because they looked at the black robes as mystical, having magic, is what I was always instructed. I took a course from Harry Fritz.
Yeah,
And,
powerful medicine.
Had powerful medicine.
Powerful
So,
medicine.
when there was that jealousy, so when they thought that the Jesuits were embracing the Blackfeet Indian, they got mad, and that was when the falling out happened at St. Mary's, and they closed it after 10 years.
Yeah, it started, basically.
It was just 10 years.
That's right. Their interaction started in 1840 and ended for a time in 1850.
Right, and then they went on to Coeur d'Alene, and also California was where the big mission was set up.
Phil, what were some of the sites? What were some of the sites up there, the locales up there in this, of the missions and the names? There was a St. Michael at let me get it right.
I think it was St. Michael over at near Browning. The Holy Family was over on the Two Medicine, right below what's commonly known as the Buffalo Jump, Two Medicine Jump, and that was, I think, established about 1890. And then there was a chapel built on the south side of the Birch Creek around 1881. I believe Father Prando was the person who constructed that.
So some of those dates are up on the Blackfeet are a little later than the dates that we hear, 1840 dates
Right.
that we hear for the arrival of Father de Smet, for example.
Correct.
Phil, I deeply appreciate your being able to be here, and this is an ongoing dialogue. We hope to have additional inquiry. I've discovered that this is a rather large, deep subject.
I have a feeling
And
that's
just with, and I'll share with you a little bit of the size of this. This is just a few of the books, just a few. And Phil, your scholarship and everything is very meaningful in this. So we hope to once again work with you as these programs continue.
Thank you for inviting us.
But and thank you, Mrs. Percy. We'll look forward to that then. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so with those ideas and with the knowledge that we have an ongoing project up there for a piece of this history for a piece of this history, and that is the Blackfeet aspect and the Ursuline. And that what they've done, it happens to be another diocese, the Diocese of Great Falls, but what they've been able to do with the support of the people of the town of Great Falls it's a marvelous tribute. And it may be that, these things like happened in Anaconda won't have to happen again, Teresa.
I hope so. I hope this is correct.
It is a real loss to, and I feel bad that loss happened.
Well, what is sad is the sacrifice, especially of these early missionaries. In an article that I found, it talked about how they were deprived. They walked, there weren't cars, so if somebody was sick 50 miles away, they walked or went by horseback. They suffered and overworked. There were too few of them, and this is built up to what we have today as our presence in buildings. And it is sad that all these people that have sacrificed and died, some of them got very sick and died, all of it basically could be in vain every time something is torn down or discarded.
It is a loss. And actually, interestingly, there was, you mentioned dying, one of the Jesuit fathers, and these fathers were all out of Italy. They all came from Italy. Their names are difficult, and they're in the books, but it's not an easy subject. But one of the fathers arrived and within a year had drowned in the Bitterroot River at St. Mary. And then Father Ravalli came along as his replacement. So the questions we were asking were, who was Anthony Ravalli, S.J.? Why did he come to Montana? And how can we share in his legacy? I think you're starting to hear some of the answers to that, and I think this might be an opportunity for you viewers to just take a look at just a couple minutes of the original video presentation from that early history up on the Blackfeet place, or for the Blackfeet Nation, and we'll come right back then. Thank you.
In 1841, Jesuit missionaries led by Father de Smet established St. Mary's Mission in the Bitterroot Valley to devote themselves to the welfare of the white pioneers and Indian people. They brought new ideas, fulfilled medical needs, and offered religious guidance. Their sacrifices were many. By 1859, the Jesuit fathers had established another mission on the Teton River, about 75 miles from Fort Benton, near the present town of Choteau. Crop failures, flooding, drought, and increasing Indian problems would ultimately necessitate the relocation of this new mission 3 more times. Finally, in 1865, the final site, midway between the Dearborn and Sun Rivers, was decided upon. A camp was established, and work began on new buildings. After several years, the Jesuit Fathers of St. Peter's found a great need for teachers for the Indian girls at the mission. In January 1884, several Sisters of the Order of Ursula of Toledo, Ohio, had arrived at Miles City, thanks in part to the urgings of Father E.W. Lindsmith, the chaplain at Fort Keogh, Montana Territory.
There were wars going on in the eastern part of the state. With the Indians, there was a lot of trouble. And someone got the idea that if the bishop could get some sisters to come and help educate the Indians, that it would make society more peaceful. So Bishop Rondell, who was the bishop of Montana, requested volunteers to come to Montana to help educate the Indians. I've heard that the whole community offered. However, 6 were chosen to come. The leader of the 6 was Mother Amadeus.
Mother Amadeus responded. On October 30th, 1884, 6 Sisters of the Order of St. Ursula arrived at St. Peter's Mission in the wilds of Montana to teach. These were exciting times. As many as 200 children, both Indian and white, attended classes mornings and afternoons at the school during the height of St. Peter's existence in the 1890s. The mission soon became the mother house of the Montana Ursulines. As enrollment grew, new buildings were added. St. Peter's had become an oasis of knowledge and spiritual learning for the people of early north-central Montana, and there was talk of a new school for the Ursuline sisters in nearby Great Falls. As the mission school continued to flourish, studies for girls became more diverse. Latin, French, geometry, chemistry, physics, reading, writing, and geography became mainstays, while astronomy, violin and piano, painting, sewing, and embroidery rounded out their womanly education. Tragically, in 1908, the building where the Indian Boys' School was housed was destroyed by fire. That school was closed. Enrollment dropped to 100 students. The Ursuline School for Indian Girls continued. Then, on September 17th, 1911, the cornerstone was laid and construction began on the new school in Great Falls. The dreams of the Ursuline sisters were about to be realized. The next year, the Young Women's School moved to the new Ursuline Academy. Since curricula of the schools was so varied and mixing of the Indian and white students was not allowed, moving a portion of the school to Great Falls created no problems. 6 years later, on the morning of November 12, 1918, fire was discovered on the main floor under the children's dormitory in the large stone Covenant School at St. Peter's. Neighbors fought the blaze, but the battle was useless. The Indian Girls' School, the Jesuits' priests' quarters, and Mount St. Angela, the Ursuline Mother House, were destroyed by fire. The sisters' mission at St. Peter's was over. Sunken piles of stones and rubble now mark the site where the boys' and girls' schools once stood, and partial walls and corners of the priests' quarters tower over the overgrowth of trees and brush that has taken over the site. The 100-year-old steps that were once the entrance to Mount St. Angela are the only readily discernible evidence of this once magnificent place. In the distance, the Opera House, which also served as a dormitory for the Indian girls, and later an auditorium, has been converted to a barn for a nearby ranch. On a hillside, a simple cemetery overlooks the quiet remains of this once thriving mission. In the valley below, the restored chapel stands as a tribute to the history that unfolded here, a remembrance of a time when two groups came together, alien to each other, yet both sharing a hopeful vision. It was here that the various Montana tribes and the white settlers of this area entrusted the careful education of their children to the Ursulines.
Thank you, folks. We're back again, and I appreciate your being able to view those early minutes, and we'll continue this roundtable discussion. Teresa Albee.
I was just going to say, my husband is from Stevensville, and of course there's so much history there with St. Mary's Mission. And Father Ravalli, Father DeSchmidt, Father Ravalli, they started with the Indians. They started the medicine. They had a pharmacy in the back of the original mission. They had the grist mill. It's up on, I believe it's up on Burn Fork, but correct me if I'm wrong. They taught the Indians how to care for themselves, not only care for others, but how to care for themselves. And the other part of history, now I do live on Mullen Road, and the other part of the history on Mullen Road is just fascinating. Lieutenant John Mullen was commissioned to Montana, or to this area, territory of Montana, or Montana, Washington, Oregon, to make a road to connect Montana into Washington. At that time, we were territory of Washington, and it was the Jesuits. The Lieutenant Mullen at that time, he was fearful of the Indians. There were many Indians that were against the white man, and it was the Jesuits that carried him through that Mullen Road from Montana into Washington. And when his mission was completed, he then became Captain John Mullen, and there is a statue of him down in Bonner in East Missoula.
Well, it's a good point. Actually, it's like, in a sense, the Jesuits were dealing with a very large number of people. They say 14, I think it was a sizable number of people. I was going to say 1,400, but a sizable number of people greeted them at, I think, what was called Pierre's Hole down in Jackson, what we now call Jackson Hole. It was right at the base of the Tetons, but greeted the original. Somehow word gets around that Father DeSmet is on the way, and how nobody knows how this word was passed, but they came down out of these valleys here to meet him, and they embraced. They had already had reasoned their way to the presence of a great spirit, and so and I think there were some predictions among their among the stories they told that this would happen, that there would be black robes. There was a little Mary that died at at St. Mary, and she had a vision that there would be a church where she was. And this is an amazing story. But when Father, it would have been DeSmet and his group, went to build that original church, they became excited because they said, this is where little Mary said there would be a place of worship built here. So there are some wonderful stories. It was Ignace Lamousse, and it was Pierre, it was Crozier, I think. But I have to, do you have the names, Gloria? I have a highlighted copy that...
I can't remember. I know that one was a Native American, wasn't he? And...
I think there were two, and it was Peter Gaucher, and young Ignace, who was Ignace Lamousse. And those two actually had come from the Iroquois Nation, and they were traveling with the French fur trappers for the Hudson Bay. And the story of furs was that along with the westward expansion, the furs also kept going west, and the quest for furs. And so we tend to think of this area as having lines now, but at that time there were no lines. It was, and I don't know that there was a Canada by name. It was this vast territory with no borders, no boundaries. And these people, these mostly men, but not all men.
The nuns came later.
The sisters,
The
yeah.
sisters came later around the Cape. They sailed up to California, and they traveled, across the land. So there were a lot of hardships, and as I said, they sacrificed a great deal, and they introduced agriculture. Father Ravelli was the first physician in Montana.
Yeah.
There's a first recorded legal document that happened when St. Mary's was sold to John Owen, who was a trader, and with the condition that if the Jesuits wanted to come back after 3 years, they could. So they were very wise. They made that provision, but that's on record in Ravalli County. But he was a monumental man, and it just gives me goosebumps to think that as a Catholic and as a Montanan, and Italian, by the way, that, we're connected in this way. But also, I have family in Pennsylvania, and they've always been intrigued with the Jesuits in Montana. And a close friend of mine who's a retired Monsignor has studied this and had the honor of saying Mass at St. Mary's Chapel when he visited about 12 years ago. So we are loved across the nation. This is, important for every American, what happens to all these historical buildings.
Well, Father De Smet, of course, is, he's one of the famous, explorers of America. I believe the upper Mississippi, he was at St. Joseph Mission at Council Bluffs, which is, across the river from Omaha. When he came to Council Bluffs, or when he was at Council Bluffs, Ignace and I think Pierre, Mr. Gaucher. Let's see if I can, but at any rate, those two found him in the middle of September 1839. Peter Gaucher and young Ignace, passing through Council Bluffs en route to St. Louis, actually found Father De Smet there. And they were on their way to St. Louis for one reason, and this is a journey of several months, to get the black robes. And as you said earlier, Gloria, that was one of 4 trips, and not everybody survived all the trips, I think they mostly made it to St. Louis, but whether they made it back. So Phil, in his research, Phil Persig in his research, might have to find himself going to St. Louis or to Portland to get the full story on this saga.
This is true.
It's James. You have a unique perspective on history and on. And here's a historical movement, and we have the historic buildings. As a result, we have these historic buildings.
Well, I think what we've been talking about for all these months is that the buildings, the name of the buildings has a historical context, which you've been explaining of who these people were. They were real people. Mm-hmm. They had a real mission. They had a real effect, and they left a legacy. They also left buildings which are still extant. And if these buildings and these artifacts are not preserved, all there will be is photographs and memories. And memories fade because the generations pass on. And if all you've got is photographs, it's not the same as actually having a physical reality. And as Therese said, there's a huge emotional attachment to a lot of these buildings because they've gone through them from children. You went through from kindergarten.
Kindergarten.
right up through marriages and significant events in your life. So these mean a lot to people. And you can also pass on that legacy if you talk to your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. This is where I went to school, and oh yes, I remember this, and they can relate to the fact that this is a real building in a real place. It's not something that grandpa or great-grandpa made up. It's something that's actually a reality.
Well, when, from your perspective, as, what is your estimate of, say, buildings like this as far as their lifespan, as far as, there's a tendency sometimes to think of them as old because they're 75 years old, but
Well, that's nothing. They're youngsters as far as buildings is concerned.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just sort of coming into the real.
they're babies.
They're babies, really.
Yeah.
Because buildings, if they're well maintained, especially buildings that are built older, and I hate to say that the older buildings are built better, because as you get older, you may tend to say that the things were better in the olden days. But when they built buildings, they built them of natural materials. They built them as strong as they could. They built them to last. And if you preserve them and you take care of them and you maintain them, they'll last indefinitely. And I mean, the castles in Scotland where I'm from, I mean, they were built 700, 800, 900 years ago. And the Stirling Castle and, for example, Edinburgh Castle, most people can relate to Edinburgh Castle. Well, Edinburgh Castle was built in the 1200s. That's, 800 years ago. It's still there. It's been well preserved. It's been used as an army barracks and headquarters and that kind of thing for a long number of years, and it's had government money put into it. But it's been repointed. It's been rebuilt in parts. But essentially, the structure is how it was made and how it was when it was made in 1200s. So they last indefinitely if you look after them. And there's no, it's not something you're going to put money into and then it's going to fall down in about 100 years. If you keep putting money into it, and the money that's generated from tourism, if you want to put it in black line terms and say, well, how are we going to pay for this? Well, tourism pays for it. It's one of the major industries in Scotland. And what do they come to see? Come to see Edinburgh Castle. Exactly. When they come to Missoula, they come to see the historic St. Francis Xavier School, campus, church, They don't want to come and see high-rise buildings and, Disneyland's in the middle of Missoula. They want to come and see something that's essentially Montanan, and it was built by the early pioneers of the state who built it up. And it's a moneymaker, no question about it, if you want to put it in those black figure types.
Well, yeah, thanks for pointing that out, James, because I think that's the basis, part of the basis for the historic preservation movement and for the National Register, the existence of the National Register and all, is the fact that these structures, there are patrimony, and they are also, in Europe, nobody's letting buildings go because it's a source of interest. It's a focal point. I think with that, it'd be a good chance for our viewers to go and take a look at the second phase of which goes into some of the work on that Ursuline convent and how they achieved what they have achieved. We took a look at the history, we shared that with you, and now which was interesting, and now just take a look, just a couple of minutes look here, and we'll be right back. Thank you.
The new Great Falls home of the Sisters of St. Ursula, built in the center of 2 full city blocks on land donated to the sisters by the Great Falls Township Company, provided a stunning, uncluttered view of the Missouri River and surrounding mountains. A magnificent sight for its place in time, it remains an architectural treasure. Built in Gothic Revival style, the 4-story structure reflects the Ursulines' unfaltering commitment to learning. A brightly patterned brick and terracotta construction with crenellated parapets and a 5th and 6th story art studio and tower boasts a richly spiritual presence. 8 winged gargoyles, perched high above the treetops, overlook the grounds and neighborhood. The new Ursuline Academy for Girls, complete with dormitory accommodations, was an educational and cultural home for hundreds of high school-aged women and grade school-aged boys and girls. On registration day, September 1st, 1912, there were 40 boarders, 25 day pupils, and 30 music students. English, math, and science were the school's foundation. supported by the sisters' meticulous instruction in various poem skills like cooking and sewing. But the real pride of the school lay in a simple belief of the Ursuline sisters who had gathered here from throughout the region, at one time numbering over 40 sisters. A belief in the worldly importance of art and music to a well-rounded education. Today, the vibrant murals painted by Sister Raphael Schwede, the school's beloved preeminent artist and teacher, who taught here for 50 years, adorn the walls of the main hallway and chapel. Sister Raphael's fifth-floor studio, which has been recently reopened, offers a glimpse into her inspirational gift. As you tour the center, the many treasures that quietly rest within the walls of this magnificent place, preserved and held dear here, displayed in the many rooms which earlier had served much varied and different purposes, are a collection of the items from St. Peter's, brought to the Academy before the fires, as well as many of the original furnishings of the Ursuline Academy. Although the hallways no longer echo with the sounds of high school and grade school students, the center has created a respectable public demand for its space, accommodating an ever-growing need for a quiet venue and comfort, regardless of religious affiliation.
Okay, so in that segment that you all saw, I might mention we are the Xavier Foundation. There you saw how the Ursuline Foundation is working to preserve the Ursuline Convent and School at Great Falls. We're the Xavier Foundation. We're the Save St. Francis Xavier group. We are interested and we care to bring back and to get back into use, the sooner the better, our buildings, our empty buildings at St. Francis Xavier campus here in Missoula. James Weir was just helping us before the break there, before we went over to the Ursuline footage, was just filling us in a little on what the attitude toward buildings like this is in Europe. I might just digress just for a moment, since we're talking about history. The founder of the Jesuit order is Ignatius of Loyola. There's a whole story there. But one of the very interesting stories, little sidelights, is we know that Ignatius of Loyola founded the Jesuit order, and how did that happen? He was a student at the University of Paris, and one of his professors was a professor of philosophy named Francis Xavier. And so both men went on to sainthood in the Catholic Church. But that is the story of how those two met. Ignatius of Loyola was a mature man. He had been wounded in the wars for the Spanish monarchy, or for the Spanish nobles, and in recovering from his wounds, became as he called himself, a soldier of Christ. And so in that process, meeting his teacher, who became St. Francis Xavier, who became the apostle to India. So that is the naming of our parish here, of our parish campus, Francis Xavier, and St. Francis Xavier. But Teresa, you gave us a real insight there earlier, and this Ursuline building is in existence, and the woodwork, the excellent stonework, all of that, powerful presence of let's put it this way: it's not Walmart, and it's not Costco. It's a real building. James, you've referred in the past to those as 19th century buildings, masonry with wood beam masonry construction that go back hundreds, if not over 1,000 years in parts of Europe, and even on our East Coast, hundreds of years, and in New Orleans. Teresa?
I'm going to just say one little thing here is that the sisters, if anybody remembers the sisters and going to school with the sisters, they were immaculate. They preserved and I'm telling you, every single piece of wood there was in any one of their buildings. At our beautiful Loyola Sacred Heart, or our beautiful Sacred Heart building, that was so preserved. There were students there who could not afford the tuition, and they were offered to work that off, and they did. They worked off on their hands and knees. And the sisters worked right along with them on their hands and knees. Every single piece of our wood in any one of those buildings was preserved.
Well, your children went to
The
these
Sacred
schools here?
Heart,
Sacred
St.
Heart.
Francis Xavier Sacred Heart, and the many functions that go on at St. Francis Xavier School, the many people that trampled through the building at St. Francis Xavier School, downstairs, up the stairs on each side, the west and the east, and then to the basketball games. The amount of happiness and the amount of sadness that went on at St. Francis Xavier Schools, there are stories that would come out of that wall if they could be told.
Well, I guess some of us here, Gloria, your kids
Went to St. Francis and then on to Loyola. And it's just a warm feeling to know that they're in a smaller setting and safe. And, especially I went through a divorce. And so I like the fact that there was one-to-one attention for these children. And, they got the best education. I have to
So
say
you're
that.
saying
so
that
I,
as a,
I
yeah.
am very supportive of the schools. And just last week, a reporter was talking about the prominent buildings in Missoula, and she said, and her favorite was Sacred Heart Academy. I think those were the words, but she says, I've forgotten that that building no longer exists. And that is so sad that we let that happen, and we cannot afford to let it happen again. I like something that James said a couple meetings ago, that after Europe started rebuilding itself after the war, that they actually duplicated buildings that they had that were bombed. And here we are, we have them, they're paid for, and there's the threat of losing them. It is a sad commentary. It really is.
I'd just like to come back and comment on that segment of the video and the fact that the Ursuline order and the nuns were getting fewer. The building was not being used for what it was originally intended for. The school was not being used. And what they did is, instead of throwing up their hands and saying, well, we'll just knock it down and sell the land and put the money into something else, it evolved into something else, which was a part of the community and was integrated into the community and helped the community continue. And it was a legacy from the past, and it helped the Great Falls maintain its baseline in the community. And it evolved, and I think this movie gives a superb example, a local example. It's only an hour, 2 hours away in Great Falls, of a building which I think is superb architecturally, and architecture and what you like are personal opinions, but I think it's a superb example. And it's evolved into a marvelous center for retreats, conferences, meetings. It's a beautiful setting, it's peaceful, and it's a landmark in the town. And I think they've done a wonderful job of evolving this into a useful public edifice, plus a conference center and a moneymaker. And I'm not trying to make it into money all the time, but it does make money, there's no question about it. It brings people into the community. And if you come once to a conference and you like the Montana, you'll say, well, I'm going to go back there for a vacation. And guess what? You bring your family, you'll tell your friends. And I think it's been a wonderful transition. It's a beautiful building inside. They've done a marvelous job of refurbishing it. And it could be done with Francis Xavier.
Well, thank you, James. Those are good observations, and maybe this is a good point to break for our viewing audience. And just go ahead and take a look at basically the third part of this video. These are brief. These are just a couple minutes, so stay with us. And this part tells you just what they're doing presently with that building and how it's in use. And so we'll flip over to that and be right back with you.
Ursuline Center Director Harry Folan.
The groups that use the center are diversified. They're not all Catholic groups. There are more non-Catholic groups than there are Catholic groups. We have marriage encounters. We have engage encounters. We have Lutheran adoption workshops. We have new ministry training. The Montana Association of Churches meet here every year. We have, in the last 4 years, developed an elder hostel. That has really helped the center. Usually our summer months are not good in retreat work, and it's just nationwide. But since we added the elder hostel program to the Ursuline Center, it's really been a savior.
Clean dormitory rooms, still much the same as they were when they housed the Academy's students, now serve the many participants of the center's summer elder hostels and year-round retreats and business meetings. The center can accommodate over 100 guests for overnight stays. The auditorium, lined on either side by the practice rooms which served to ensure many a student's musical excellence, was once the grand stage for hundreds of nervous music recitals and a myriad of other school activities. The auditorium now plays a vital role in community gatherings, plays, and concerts. Former classrooms, once the centerpiece of the school's existence, now fulfill vital community needs as comfortable venues for meeting rooms and various group gatherings. The spiritual hub and certainly the gem of the Ursuline Academy is the chapel. Restored in 1991, the rich history of this magical place can most surely be experienced here. High stained glass windows turn incoming light to a golden tone, dispersing it into the shadowed recesses of this quiet room. Sister Raphael's paintings, adorning the walls behind the altar since 1927, celebrate the simplistic goals and monumental accomplishments of the Sisters of St. Ursula, who for over 500 years have touched so many lives throughout the world. The Heritage Museum holds many of the treasures from the Ursulines' colorful past. Photographs, Indian artifacts, and items made by the sisters at St. Peter's Mission can be seen here. Many of the cherished items from both St. Peter's Mission and the Ursuline Academy are also on display. In the spring of 1950, the Ursuline Academy graduated its last class of high school seniors. However, the sisters continued to educate both girls and boys through grade 8 for many years. The Ursuline Academy graduated its last class of 8th grade students in 1966. The sisters continued to teach younger children here at the Academy until 1971, when it officially became the Ursuline Center. Today, a kindergarten and daycare center thrive here, and history continues.
We walk on the shoulders of those before us, those courageous early missionary nuns. To think of daring to build a place like this in those days, you know, we just feel there is something special about this.
The 6 sisters who still reside here unselfishly continue to serve the community through the Ursuline Center by opening their home to the many ecumenical activities that take place here. The dedication to the success of this wonderful place by the sisters and the center staff of 14 lay people is unending. Montana's rich history is spiritually enriched by the sacrifices of each of the Sisters of Ursula, past and present, united in their strong religious beliefs and simple commitment to bringing education and culture to Montana's youth. Their amazing story of courage and unselfish dedication shall be forever reverently remembered.
Well, here we are back again, and we are the Xavier Foundation. We are Save St. Francis Xavier. Please visit us at our website, www.xavierfoundation.net. I think this is all a very interesting history, a very interesting story, and we're hoping for a good outcome to this story, and we're hoping and dreaming of the full support of the community of Missoula. James, before the break, alluded to that, how the community of Great Falls now takes pride in the Ursuline situation, the continuation of that as a retreat center, as a convention center. It has over 100 beds for people that want to stay there. That's another, it's a different type of an animal, so to speak, as a building. I mean, it has dormitory space as well as classroom space. But our building has 12 classrooms, a gym, an auditorium. The demolition cost of $250,000, including building a parking lot, would actually quite nicely do a great deal of the refurbishing that the building, after these 70 years could use. Although I will say this, it's a good, solid, usable building. St. Patrick's Hospital was in it until early last year, utilizing it fully as space for their administrative offices while they built the new hospital. It is not a bad building. It's a good building, and it has lots of good continued use in it. Contrast that with what you mentioned, Teresa, the loss of buildings and what a hole that leaves in a community. And you're not the first, Teresa. I heard this story was it St. Peter's over there at Anaconda?
Yes, and St. Peter's School was St. Peter's Grade School, and it was also St. Peter's High School. And in 1952, they built a new high school in Anaconda. It was Anaconda Central. So I was part of that history too. And one half of my freshman year was at the old St. Peter's High School, grade school, and then from there on it was Anaconda Central. And I do have to say that my father and my grandfather helped build St. Peter's High School or school.
They personally
built it with their hands.
With their hands,
right?
Yeah. And so it's interesting. That's an interesting thought.
I forgot about that till you said that.
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting thought, and they're here. In a sense, they're here in the room with us now. We can sense that because people don't die. Their spirits go on to another world, and think of the spirits. Think of the living spirits of those men that swarmed over that building. It was basically built. I think it was in 1927, built in a period of 6 months. And luckily, it was the drive and the initiative there that was in the Catholic Church to build that, because it was only a short time later, 1929, that the Great Depression hit, and I don't think anybody was building anything. But Sacred Heart Convent was mentioned, and it's hard to visualize what that might have been, but here's for those of you that never saw Sacred Heart. It was a magnificent structure that was exactly the structure from the same set of A.J. Gibson architectural plans, and built by A.J. Gibson, the builder and architect, as Old Main on campus. That's what we lost. We lost essentially Old Main, and it was unfortunate. It's something that's happened. They say don't cry over spilt milk, but many people have said we don't want to have another Sacred Heart happen. We don't want to lose more of our heritage here. These school buildings are rapidly being put back into use as we go across the town. There's a school, the Prescott School, was it, up the Rattlesnake, has become, yet another school has occupied it. There's adaptive reuse.
And Tom, I might even say, I can't say for the people that built the Loyola or St. Francis or Sacred Heart, but I know from my own personal experience from my grandfather, my father, they were not paid. They did this out of the love of their church, and they were excellent carpenters.
Well, those are the stories of those magnificent churches in Europe, which, by the way, this is an old story. On the one hand, adaptive reuse is going on all over our country as people say, let's don't lose that building, let's just fix it up and keep using it. They're good buildings. But we've made the point here before about the famous Notre Dame of Paris that's actually, you might say, the trademark of Paris. If you ever see an image of Paris, if somebody's going to choose one image, it'll be Notre Dame. And that was actually owned by the demolition company, actually owned that building. And when the people of Paris discovered what was going on, they rose up and put a stop to it. But there was a great, you might say, period of church demolition going on in France. But when the people discovered that their own Notre Dame was going to be lost, and of course never to be replaced, and thank goodness they did, because here it is, what is it, well over 100 years later, 150 years later, or something, that we still have Notre Dame to marvel at and to appreciate. James, you're nodding.
Well, yeah, I mean, why do you go to Paris? I mean, you go to see the Folies Bergère and Notre Dame. You know, I mean, you don't go to see the Georges Pompidou Center. I mean, well, at least I wouldn't anyway. That's a personal opinion. I think it's an eyesore myself, but the French are eccentric, to put it nicely. I love France and the French, but the Pompidou Center stretched my admiration a lot, I must admit. But when you go to Paris, I mean, you go to France, you want to see the Louvre Museum, and then you go to see Notre Dame. You know, and if it wasn't there, what would replace it?
Well, I'm gonna, James, I might as well introduce a little bit of this. It's been all sweetness in life, but I'm gonna introduce just a little. I was in the Pompidou Center, and I'll just describe it. It's like walking into a Tinker Toy. I'm
going to switch off my microphone now.
Or some kind of a Lego building. It's so interesting because all of the tubes, all of the service modules, the elevators, the escalators, the what do you call them, the ventilation tubes, the electrical work, and I guess it's color-coded, right,
yes,
James?
Yes, it is, yes. Correctly color-coded to French standards, yeah.
You've probably seen pictures of it, but just use your imagination and think of a building with the guts on the outside.
I suppose we would be, if they were going to demolish it, I suppose we would have to be honor bound to go and defend it being demolished, but I would have a hard time believing in it, I'll tell you. Yeah.
But it's a modern art gallery, and so what it does, it kind of sets you on edge right from the moment you visit, as being an off-the-wall type of. But I just got the 1-minute sign, and so I'll say thank you, Gloria Rourke. Thank you for your comments about
Thank you, Tom.
what this building could do and what it could do for working parents, as an example, as a child care center. James Weir, for your comments on the broad world perspective, as well as what this could mean to the working families of Missoula. Teresa, for the heartfelt and deep understanding of Montana history as a person who grew up here. It's so meaningful. I think we've got a great team here, and thanks to Phil Persig and Mrs. Persig for their contribution. We are the Save St. Francis Xavier group. We will see you next month. We have viewing times for this. We'll try to get those out to you. But check with MCAT, and there are 2 viewing times. So thank you very much, and I'll say goodnight to everybody, and once again, from the Xavier Foundation, Save St. Francis Xavier School, thank you.